Act 5, Scene 1. This scene opens on a street in Mantua, with Romeo telling of a premonition that he has had, of receiving some good news. He describes a dream in which Juliet finds him dead, but her kiss revives him, and he becomes an emperor. He reflects upon the power of love, which is so great that even dreaming of love can bring intense joy. Romeo's servant Balthazar appears, and Romeo immediately asks him the news of Juliet. Balthazar reluctantly tells him that Juliet is lying dead in the Capulet burial vault. A distraught Romeo curses the fate that has brought this about. He orders Balthazar to fetch horses and riding materials, adding that he will go to Verona that night. Balthazar voices his concern for Romeo's behavior and advises him not to rush into anything. Romeo dismisses these concerns, and having established that Balthazar has not brought any letter from Friar Lawrence, sends him to carry out his orders. Alone, Romeo ponders the question of how he will join his beloved in death. He remembers that an apothecary lives nearby, who, on a previous encounter, appeared to be in dire economic circumstances. Romeo recalls thinking that if a man was ever in need of poison, this apothecary would be desperate enough to sell it to him, even though it was illegal to do so. Being now in such a situation, Romeo calls to the apothecary's shop and offers 40 ducats for some fast-acting lethal poison. The apothecary is reluctant to break the law, but Romeo reasons that the world has not been fair to him, and so its laws should not be consideration for him. The apothecary relents, saying that, despite his moral reservations, his poverty-stricken state justifies him selling Romeo the poison. Paying for the poison, Romeo remarks that money is the real poison in this world. He urges the apothecary to go and feed himself, and takes the poison away with him, planning to consume it at Juliet's grave. Act 5, Scene 2. It is evening, and Friar John calls to Friar Lawrence's cell. Friar John had planned to travel to Mantua so Friar Lawrence give him a letter to deliver to Romeo. The purpose of the letter was to inform Romeo of the plan to fake Juliet's death, and Friar Lawrence is now anticipating a note from Romeo by return. Friar John replies that on his way to Mantua he had called on a fellow friar who was to accompany him on his journey, and had found his colleague tending to the sick in a house in Verona. Unfortunately, the health authorities had arrived, and fearing that the house was plague-ridden, confined everyone inside so that they would not spread infection. Unable to leave the house, Friar John could not go to Mantua, nor could he find anyone to deliver Friar Lawrence's letter to Romeo, or even return it to Friar Lawrence. Upon hearing this news, Friar Lawrence laments his bad fortune, saying that the letter he carried was very important information. He ominously proclaims that failure to communicate this information to the intended recipient could have dangerous consequences. Friar Lawrence then asks Friar John to fetch him a crowbar, and resolves to go and rescue Juliet from the vault himself and hide her in his cell. He also declares his intention to send another message to Romeo, telling him of this change of plans. All right, you finally made it. It's the last act of the play. Act 5, Scene 3. The climactic scene opens at night in the churchyard where the Capulet burial vault is located. Count Paris and his page approach, and ordering the page to stand watch, Paris enters the Capulet vault to lay flowers on his young bride's grave. The page signals that someone is coming, and Paris hides. Romeo and his servant Balthazar approach, and Romeo gives Balthazar a letter for Lord Montague. Romeo then orders Balthazar to leave and not to return, but Balthazar, concerned for his master, hides nearby. Romeo enters the vault and is confronted by Paris. He tries to dissuade Paris from arresting him, but Paris insists. This angers Romeo, and after a brief fight, he fatally wounds Paris. Before he dies, Paris asks Romeo to lay him next to Juliet. Seeing Juliet still beautiful, Romeo feels glad that he is about to join her. Spying Tybalt's corpse, he asks forgiveness for killing him. Then he takes his poison and dies. Just then, Friar Lawrence enters the churchyard and meets Balthazar, who tells him that Romeo is inside the vault. The friar enters and sees the bloodied weapons of Romeo and Paris, then their dead bodies. Juliet wakes from her unconscious state and asks for Romeo. The friar, hearing watchmen approaching, begs Juliet to leave with him and go into hiding because their plans are undone and Romeo is dead. Juliet refuses, and the friar flees. Juliet kisses the dead Romeo, and then stabs herself to death. The watchmen, with Paris's page, enter and survey the scene. Word is sent to the prince, the Capulets, and the Montagues, while some watchmen search the churchyard and find Friar Lawrence and Balthazar. The prince and the feuding families arrive, and the friar gives his account of the events leading to this tragedy. Reading the letter intended for Romeo's father, the prince verifies his story. He then berates both families for allowing their feud to cause so many deaths. Finally, reconciliation takes place as Lord Capulet offers his hand to Lord Montague. Lord Montague offers to erect a golden statue of Juliet, and Lord Capulet promises the same for Romeo. The prince bids everyone to leave and reflect on the tragic story of the true lovers. That's it. That concludes our study of Romeo and Juliet.